What's up, guys? I'm here with Cousin Scott.
Hello.
And we want to talk about the different tests we've been doing and watching movies on different displays. And unlike everything else that we've ever done RetroRGB related, unfortunately we're just going to have to ask that you take our word for it, which drives me insane because good nerds prove their work. Mm-hmm. But I don't have any possible way to capture 4K video.
Yeah.
I don't have any way to capture 3D video. And the actual 1080p 60 video recordings I've taken of the CRTs, it doesn't, for whatever reason, it doesn't go through. So.
And these were just sort of informal tests in the first place, just for our own editing. I don't think we even thought we were going to make a video at first, right?
We have never planned on making a video on this until I started talking about our tests to so many different people. I really felt that it actually justified a podcast about it. So yeah, I'll try to throw in some video examples and splice them in where I can, but this is the only time in the history that we've been doing RetroRGB that we're just going to have to talk about it and not show anything, which sucks because I make fun of people for that. But
yeah,
you know, the only other disclaimer is that Scott and I are both extremely knowledgeable in this stuff, but I would never call myself an all-around expert in everything that we're going to be talking about. And I am notorious for fumbling my words on the podcast. I very often say things like upscaler instead of processor, or words that sound the same like component, composite. So, you know, all of our testing was correct, and all the things we talk about are genuinely what we found while we were doing it. But yeah,
it was. These were informal tests, and it was interesting enough that we felt we wanted to talk about it. It's exactly. Not like we didn't put through the rigor that a lot of the RetroRGB stuff had.
Right.
So this is a bit more fun, but they were fun experiments to run.
Yeah, I enjoyed the show of all that. So I guess we should start with the one that's most related to the channel. It involves a 32-inch BVM, and the one that's behind Scott. Ever since I blew my back out, I can't lift that stuff anymore. So it's now on the bottom roller. But one of the tests that we did that I was really fascinated by was the Knight Rider 2000 movie. From the 90s, it was a made-for-TV movie. And as far as made-for-TV movies go, it was actually awesome. As far as actual movies go, it was like a pretty good Knight Rider episode. That's about it.
It was a pretty good Knight Rider episode, yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted to know how we could get it to look the best, because even through an Oppo Blu-ray player that does an amazing job at upscaling, it looked like garbage on my OLED. I mean, and not in a good way. Not in a way where, you could see film grain or you could see the stunt man. Not at all in a good way. All you saw was noise. Mm-hmm. It was very. I actually am not really sure how that one was made on the DVD. It was put as a bonus feature on the Season 1 Knight Rider box set.
Was it the DVD set or was it the Blu-ray set?
It was the DVD set. So because it was a bonus feature, they did not really spend, I'm assuming they didn't really spend much time trying to make it look good.
I think that it was after the life of the actual show had run its course. Maybe we'll talk about the show a little bit, but I mean, it doesn't have the music, it doesn't have the car. I think it was viewed as like a DVD extra, something to that effect.
Right. So the episode itself, you're correct at, but the box set was at the time where this was right at the DVD boom, where people were going, holy crap, we can get every episode of my favorite TV show, let's buy them. And then most people realized they bought them and never watched them, because no one, except crazy people, sit there and watch all hundreds episodes of things. And yes, I will go back and do a recap of the entire Knight Rider series at some point. But
I'll look forward to listening to it, not watching it.
Well, the point is, I think this is a perfect example of something that is, it was not tweaked for quality. It was probably just thrown on. It might even still actually be in 480i on the DVD, but your players might scale it, whatever it is. And obviously the player would have a small amount to do with it, depending on. But the test started with, since this looks like absolute garbage on my OLED through one of the best Ultra HD Blu-ray players you can get, I think, as far as I know, the best, how is it going to look on a CRT, comparatively speaking? And there's a couple factors involved, so let's just start with the BVM, 32-inch BVM. Now, we had it running through component video in 480p. So the player itself was either playing it in its native 480p format or doing deinterlacing from 480i to 480p. Let's just assume it was 480p on the DVD.
Yeah.
We'll give them that much. So the first thing that I noticed when we started setting up, before we even get into the video quality, is even though it was a 4:3 movie, because it was on a DVD, it was outputting 16:9. So when I did try to pump it through the 4:3 37-inch MegaView, I had a little bit of issues, and it's something where you could use zoom features. With a Raspberry Pi, you could easily do it.
Wait, this is before I showed up?
Before you even showed up, I just figured, let me see what happens. And you get letterbox, so you get the same top and bottom black bars that you would get if it was a 16:9 movie. But because it was a 4:3 and a 16:9 frame, you're looking at a square image.
Wait, I'm sorry, stop for a second. So this is a movie that was shot in 4:3.
Yes, made for TV.
And the video of the image itself was 16:9?
So I don't know if it was the way the video is encoded, or if it's the way the player interpreted it, which I'm sure anybody watching could probably comment on this. But the bottom line is, the Blu-ray player I used to go out to 480p,
it was a Blu-ray player.
It was a Blu-ray player playing a DVD in 480p. It treated the image as if it was a 16:9 image, so you got it here and here. And
so if you use a DVD player, you can set 4:3 and 16:9 on the Blu-ray on the DVD player.
Really?
It's a DVD setting.
This
but
was
maybe not
the
a Blu-ray player.
We did not use the Oppo. We used a very good Samsung, but not on the level of an Oppo. And this monitor's RGB inputs were kind of on the fritz, so I just figured we would skip that for the test anyway. But that, at the very least, if you're planning on doing something like this, watching older content on square 4:3 TVs, you should at least take that into account, that you're gonna have to make sure your player could do that. And if it can't, if there's some kind of zoom function or something you could do, but...
I mean, generally speaking, DVD players have an aspect ratio feature on it. Now, I don't know about trying to run a Blu-ray player in there, but I watch tons of old movies and, movies made before the... Yeah, movies that, if they're from the DVD, and if it's from the 50s or earlier, it's going to be in 4:3 almost guaranteed anyway.
Lots of stuff.
So,
TV shows.
And then TV shows too, but I was watching the old movies, but and for years I was just running off of a 4:3 TV, and it was just the best way to watch them. And that was a matter of switching a setting on the Blu-ray.
Wait, you had a 4:3 480p TV?
No, I had a 240p, or I had a 480i TV, but it was still, this is an aspect ratio thing.
So that's the thing that I found, and maybe I'm just unlucky. I've had experience with 20 DVD players, maybe, in my life. Infinitely more Super Nintendo experience than DVD player experience, but the DVD players I had that ran in 480i, absolutely. But I think a lot of the manufacturers took...
Oh, it was lock it into 16:9 when you were running 480p.
Right. And I think their perspective was trying to make it easier for people at home. So if it's 480i, almost guaranteed it's probably going to be a 4:3 square TV. If it's 16:9, it can go either way.
Mm-hmm.
So I never had a 480p 4:3 TV. The Luvas I had were both 16:9.
Yeah.
So I guess this is a really long way of saying this is not as easy as plugging it in. Check to make sure your DVD player can do it. But playing it, and I also did check on a 480i square TV, and it was good, but not great. So getting to the good stuff. 480p component into this BVM. Because it was sending 16:9 into a 16:9, it was perfectly centered. And the downside that I found was, because this thing is so freaking sharp and amazing, I did see a lot of transfer noise. Whether the original video wasn't that great because it was meant to be seen on on a TV broadcast or not, but the good sides outweighed all of it. I thought it looked great.
As far as this image is concerned, I think it looks great. And if I was to like posit my hypothesis as to what the source material is like, let's assume that for this like rando made-for-TV movie that they didn't want to rescan it, then they are probably driving off. And this is not an HD. This is not the HD era again. So you're still dealing with like 480i or 480p at best in the first place. I'm guessing that they probably just ran off of their original broadcast masters, which are probably on either Digibeta or Beta SP.
Which would be 480i then, right?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I wasn't thinking, when I was in film school we would use Beta SP for 480i type content, but I think Digibeta had 480p mode. I can't really remember at this point. But my guess is that they just used their original content because it was made for a television back in the day, and then you were going to be watching it on probably the same TV when they ripped it to the DVD. Mm-hmm. So my guess is that would have been the path of least resistance, and evidenced by the fact that, not to jump the gun again, but it didn't look so great on this thing, but this used to be my TV, and I watched a ton of 480p DVD content on it through the HDMI in the back of it, and like I've seen movies look better than that. So
let's go to that part then, because that I found fascinating, and that opened up a whole other door of questions that I had. This is, I'll put the model number in the description, but this is a widescreen consumer grade Sony TV, one of the few consumer grade CRTs to ever be shipped with an HDMI input. And so the one thing that I noticed about it is all content that you pump into it is processed through its onboard video processor. Unlike a professional grade monitor, if you send a BVM or a PVM 240p, 480i, 480p, it's going to present that exact image. Whereas that TV had a processor in it that processed everything. So I don't know if it does, because it's inherently a 1080i tube. I don't know if it converts everything to 1080i. I don't know if it converts everything to 720p, including downscaling 1080i to 720p. I don't know, and I would actually really love to know the answer to that for anybody that has done tests on these.
I'm pretty sure it doesn't go to 1080i, because what I would run through this thing for almost everything that I consumed while it was in circulation in my house was through my PS3, mm-hmm. which I locked to 720p on it. Because you can set the video settings on it, and I just turned off the option of clicking over to 1080p or 1080i.
Yeah.
So it was always in 1080i or 720p. And before I came to that conclusion, I tested it with 1080i a little bit first, and it looked different and it looked crappy, which is why I decided I would just prefer the progressive scan like mode of it. So yeah, it definitely produces some kind of a progressive look with that particular tool.
Definitely. And the one regret I have in this experiment is what we really should have done is we should have started out and watched 10 minutes of the movie it's off camera, but a standard 480i square TV. Then we should have watched this. Then we should have watched the consumer grade, and we should have ended with the BVM, because as much as I really love that consumer grade Sony, and I think it's a phenomenal TV, what was your reaction when we switched from it?
Oh, it looked terrible. It looks really good on this TV, so I think that like amplified all the little artifacting that you would see. The worst of it was when there was white on the screen. It created that like rainbowy effect along the edge of it, like without fail every time you saw it.
Right.
And that leads me to believe I think that getting into this would like almost gets a little bit psychological, or just the way that your eye like interprets like some of these images, because I think that we saw it looking okay on this screen, and then the transfer came down and it looked like this. But I can say for sure that like every time there was white on the screen, it didn't go to complete shit when I was watching it at home. I mean, it looked worse than a regular television, in my opinion, like a regular like 480i one. So I think that there's something about that particular movie that we were watching that was particularly conducive to like nasty little edge artifacting and stuff like that.
Which is actually why I think it was the perfect thing to do this test.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
But that is a big thing about professional grade and broadcast monitors, isn't just the line count. This is a 1,000 line monitor, so it's obviously, it's obviously going to be a sharper image.
And that means top to bottom, right? Like it's horizontal
yes.
lines? Yeah.
So the thing about these though is the actual video processing that it does keeps it as pure as possible. I mean, they literally would calibrate Hollywood movies on these things, so that it had to be. Whereas, your typical, I think this was $2,300 when it was brand new. Your typical HD CRT high-end consumer grade TV does not have the technology that a $55,000 broadcast monitor does. So the way it processes the video is going to have a big effect on it. And I might be wrong about this, but I'm going to go under the assumption that a TV that takes a 480i signal and sticks it on a tube as 480i is going to require much less processing than a TV that needs to send it to a high-def tube, because you essentially in fact, exactly like flat screens, the upscaler in your flat screen will very well determine the picture that you get.
Sure. And we sent it in via HDMI into this, right?
We did send it
There's
HDMI.
component on this guy, and it was HDMI on this guy.
I think we tried both, and it looked identical. Component and HDMI on that, or maybe
I don't think we did, because I know that unless we messed with the settings in this, I actually hadn't used component for a few years with this tube, so I turned it off. So I don't remember turning that mode back on.
I did it afterwards because I did have to turn that back on. But
okay.
when my post experiment tests happened, it was it looked the same.
Okay.
So, but I mean that's a big factor, right? Because it's exactly like those new TCL TVs, where a friend of mine bought one, and a couple guys in the forum who also have very high-end TVs were talking about it and ranting about it. And we fired up, I think, the Netflix app or something, or something that could display 4K content. And I know Netflix compression is garbage, by the way. Their 4K, The Punisher in 4K was or maybe it wasn't The Punisher. Well, one of them was
The Punisher had its own problems. It did a bunch of post-processing filters and stuff on it.
But when then I put an Xbox One S and an Ultra HD Blu-ray through that same set, it looked amazing. So once again, it's the same thing. You're relying on the onboard upscaler, hoping that it's going to get it right. And unlike LCDs, which has the fixed resolution, I don't know what that tube is, and I don't even know if we fed it the correct resolution would it make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the big question mark if we were taking this test more seriously. I think I would like to understand a little bit more why this didn't produce a terrific image, but at the same time, that's purely academic. There's really so little value in solving that riddle in the first place, Yeah,
and we're also comparing it to a 32-inch BVM.
Yeah.
So please take that into consideration when you're hearing this stuff. I mean, I still liked watching it on the consumer grade Sony versus my OLED TV. I still thought it produced a more true to form image. But I think the conclusion that I came to after these tests was it surprised me a lot more than I thought it would. But watching content that's really not good enough for flat screens, so made for TV movies, old TV shows that were only they never did a great job and rescanned them to Blu-ray. Having any professional grade CRT, so even a PVM that supports 480p, I thought it looked phenomenal. I think that was by far the way to go. And I realize not everybody can have a D32, but you can absolutely find yourselves some kind of progressive CRT, even if you just use a VGA monitor, and then you convert 480p component to 480p VGA.
And just as a slight addendum to this conversation, so I used to have a PVM that did 480p. Bob just got the model number, I'm sure.
20L5.
And I put it to use for a little while because I had on my hands a bunch of Russ Meyer films. Russ Meyer, who made titty films, basically. But they were artsy-fartsy titty films that I happened to think are cool. And I got a bunch of DVDs, and I didn't realize that they were PAL. And so they were just sort of collecting dust in my collection for a long time. And then one day I was like, you know what? I bet I could plug that into my PVM and it'll just work. And sure enough, it did work. And these are this is essentially a bootleg is what I had my hands on. It was a decent transfer from a bootleg, but
and how did you connect it through a PC?
No, through a DVD player. I had an old DVD player, and it was region free, so it didn't click over into like, it didn't give me a region restriction, but I could set the setting on. I'll tell you, it looked really good, and I kind of felt like I wasn't expecting to have like a world-class viewing experience of this film, and I really think I had watched it under best possible circumstances. And around that time, I thought to myself, like, maybe I should watch all my DVDs on this thing. But it just didn't end up working out that way.
Yeah, I thought that too, and there have been DVDs that were really well done that look great on my plasma that you now have. The GT25 50-inch Panasonic plasma. That thing was amazing. And I now have the LG OLED 65-inch. And a really well-made, 480p DVD. It looks fine on those. Maybe I would like it better on this, but something that they took their time in post-processing and made the DVD nice. I don't know, it's debatable. But I think my conclusion through these tests were that if you have the choice to a 480p CRT for something that, especially 4x3 content, TV shows made for TV movies, I would absolutely choose to watch that on a tube. And I would even say, I have a 65-inch fucking OLED. I would rather put it on a 20-inch or even a 17-inch VGA monitor on a rolling cart and roll it, right in front of me than do that. I think that would be overall a better experience.
I mean, if you're used to the rolling it up in front of you experience, I think that's a terrific way to consume content. I think a lot of people just are used to watching their screen on the other side of their room. And
True.
It's like, I think it's part to do with just the fact that it's always been a matter of like rolling it up to you, because it kind of gives you that like arcade experience where you're always close to the screen.
Yeah, you also have to remember that generally speaking, the people that have followed our work are not the type of people to leave all of the post-processing on their flat screens.
Mm-hmm.
All of you awesome fucking nerds are the guys that turn all that off and know how to calibrate your TV, even if you don't go through the calibration. So that type of person who could see the difference between a flat screen with all of that, filtering turned on and not, is the same type of person that would say, why wouldn't I spend $50 on a rolling cart and roll something over? And and I've even seen people who have amazing home theater systems who do the same thing. They just put their center channel speaker above, and I know you're not supposed to, but they calibrate it and put it above their TV, not below it, so when they need to roll over their CRT or whatever else, they still have the perfect surround sound.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that idea. That's something that's worth thinking about. I've been thinking about surround sound for my apartment, and it would be good to be able to get the PVM or the BVM working with it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, my conclusion, and I have watched a few things on this. I've watched a bunch of things on my other monitors, and I would definitely say if it's weird content, just watch it on a really good 480p tube. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. If you have access to like weird stuff, like let's say you got like a bunch of hard to find stuff, you gotten it off of
the original Japanese Master of Dune.
Yeah, exactly, that kind of stuff.
The 4-hour version.
And you've got one of these lying around, like it's a great resource for that. So I got a question for you. So with the finickiness of BVMs in general,
yes,
do you? We've talked about that like a number of times, but it's always been in the context of the video games. Mm-hmm. Do you have any expectation that just sort of consumer grade video would produce similar problems, or is it going to be a little bit more stable in that context?
So once a signal, I guess a quick explanation in that all of the PVMs that we've tested, you plug a signal into it, you turn it on, and it works. And that's it. The worst you'll have is some of the ones like my 14M2U, where you have to press the button combination on the front to set it. That's it. You got it set and you're fine. All of the BVMs I've seen have some kind of strangeness. There's a sync issue. There's some where the horizontal sync slices don't work right on like Master System, where you get the curvature. There's some that just don't work at all because the signal is just slightly off. But TV and movies are all video standards.
Yeah, that's what I was figuring.
So you won't run into any of those issues. The worst thing that you might run into with a BVM is that the entire horizontal sync slice issue with Master System. It's the same thing if you take a VCR and if you play it, it's fine, but then you hit fast forward, it freaks out the sync signal. So you might have to change inputs and change back once you're done fast forwarding or rewinding.
Gotcha. So all the other content you watched, was it in a similar way? Or did you ever use like the SDI on the back of this?
Oh yeah, but here's the thing. When I watched a bunch of stuff in 720p HD SDI, and there was no advantage of this over a calibrated OLED or plasma, simply because this screen is so fucking perfect that in 720p it might as well be a flat screen. You barely see any kind of scan lines at all, and it just, even when I watched the Knight Rider Blu-rays, so the TV show, not the made-for-TV movie, I didn't like it in 720p on this because it was exactly like my OLED. I liked dialing it down to 480p so it looked like the original TV series, but just not as super sharp. Because actually, I won't get into it too much, but one of the things that I loved and hated about the Knight Rider Blu-rays were that you saw all of the stuntmen, you saw all of like the ramps that they built, which on the one hand is amazing because it proved that this is pre-CGI. They really took a piece of shit Trans Am and drove it over a ramp over a truck.
Yeah, that's what I love.
But at the same time, watching like a 5'5", 260-pound guy put on a curly-haired wig and pretend to be David Hasselhoff, I'd rather just watch it in 480p where it's still better, but not as crazy. So let's move on to the other thing, because this is the other thing that I was not expecting in the slightest. We watched a movie, and before everybody makes fun of the choice of movie, it was the most recent movie, and I think the only one in the second half of 2017 that was shot in 4K 3D.
At least 4K 3D. Actually, most of the movie was higher than that.
Yes.
But yeah.
Now, there is no home 4K 3D format. You could only see that in theaters, and 99.9% of theaters are not true. They're bullshit screens. They're not real IMAX. But besides the point. So we got Transformers, the
Last Night.
The Last Night,
which I think is the 5th one?
It's the 5th.
It's the last one. It's the latest one.
Whatever. It's Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch's third, second, I don't know. But,
it's the second one I've seen.
The point of the movie was that it was the only way we could find a true 4K movie and a movie that was true 1080p 3D.
Mm-hmm. Shot natively in 3D, not doing a post-conversion.
And apparently the masters were done individually. Or maybe they mastered it in whatever it was specifically calibrated for both formats. Mm. So while some of my friends, most notably Tobias, drove him nuts that the aspect ratio would change, so sometimes you get the black bars and sometimes you wouldn't, that actually didn't bother me at all.
Well, that, for what it's worth, let's explore that for just a second. Because that's not because it was shot. The reason why that was because they shot it in the same logic as Christopher Nolan for IMAX presentation. Right. And if you watch a proper IMAX movie in a proper IMAX screen, you'll realize that the screen is much more square than a full screen. I think it's like 1.4 or something like that. It's much taller than a regular 4:3 screen. Right. And if when Christopher Nolan was shooting his actual IMAX 70mm film stock, there's all this extra screen real estate that when you see it in the theater, it fills the entire IMAX screen. And when he converted these films to Blu-ray, for instance, The Dark Knight and Interstellar and The Dark Knight Rises and all that, the native 35mm content was shot in anamorphic widescreen, which means that you have
on a 635 aspect, you still have a black bar on the top and the bottom. Yeah.
But when you when he was using the actual IMAX footage, if he wanted to show the entire image, he would have been cropping. There would have been column bars on the side of it because the IMAX screen is wider. Or is taller than the regular screens. So there is a crop that occurs, but those shots are all shot to not take up the entire frame anyway.
It bothers some people. It didn't really bother me at all.
And anyway, The Last Night, which was not shot, as far as I'm aware, on IMAX stock, but it was shot for IMAX using latest and greatest IMAX cameras. Often, I think it's 6 and 8K resolution.
Mm-hmm.
The same logic applies.
Right.
So for the big set piece moments, and even just for like individual shots here and there, where they would shoot it on those like screen filling IMAX cameras, for that video transfer, those images are actually cropped on the sides when you look at it on the TV screen, but it fills the screen rather than the regular content, which has letterbox bars.
Gotcha. So that's the content we use. I don't even think we told. All right, sorry.
It's The Last Night. We did.
I've been drinking. The point of that was I wanted to see what was a better at-home experience on a movie that was done right, not a post-processed crap, and on a good TV. Is 4K better, or is 1080p 3D better? And also, does the player make a difference? We tried a bunch of different players.
Yeah, we thought we were going to run 2 tests, but at the end of the session, we ended up trying every single thing. Like, let's try it this way.
Every combination. So now that you know the content and how it was presented and everything, the first thing we did was watch it through an Xbox One S with the latest software update, which is really important because it was outputting too bright. It's a detailed explanation why, but essentially too bright. The latest software update fixed that. The one thing I will say that we didn't get to test is I actually can notice a difference between my Oppo player and the Xbox. And the Oppo is, we're talking 1 chip to calibrated 1 chip levels. It's still this much, but it was still great. So
wait, this is your brand new Oppo?
Yes, the UDP 203, the 4K.
Oh, so you didn't even have that when we did this experiment. Okay. Cool.
But point is, it was still great. So while there were better options when we ran the test, it's still a great option. And the first thing we did was watch the 3D Blu-ray through the same media, through the Xbox One S. Now, one might argue that a player such as the Oppo would do a better job upscaling, but it actually doesn't even apply to this because we watched 20 minutes of that movie, maybe 30.
No, we watched about 45-minute chunks. It was a long movie, so we had to watch it for a while.
So in 3D, we got through a bunch of action shots, a bunch of dialogue, 1080p 3D. Then we ejected the disc, and through the same player, the same TV, I made sure to calibrate each resolution. In fact, some of it you were there for.
That was a bit of a trick. Yeah, we had to keep changing the settings.
Then we put in the 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, and I immediately and absolutely noticed more detail in certain scenes, without a doubt.
Okay.
Now, it wasn't a massive difference. It was nowhere near DVD to Blu-ray. Not even close. But I still noticed a difference. But I felt overall, even 5 minutes into the 4K, even though it was more detail, the 3D experience overall was more enjoyable.
Oh, I completely agree. Now, I would say up front that, most film, I think that one of the big revelations for me was that Michael Bay actually seems to have a handle on 3D, which I wouldn't have given him the benefit of the doubt of it, to be honest.
Right.
But the truth of the matter when it pertains to 3D is that there's a decreasingly small subset of filmmakers that could even use the 3D very well in the first place.
Yeah.
But if they did, every single shot that is in this movie is loaded up with a set of creative decisions as far as the 3D is concerned. They had to decide where everything was going to fall in every single shot. That's a lot of creative work, and there's sometimes creative solutions to getting around interesting spaces. There's a throwaway scene that takes place in a museum with dinosaur bones in it.
Right.
I'm so much happier that I saw that in 3D because fucking T-Rex bones look cool in 3D.
Yeah, you can see through it, or you can see the depth.
Absolutely.
And everything. And not to sidetrack too much, but Scott and I have watched a ton of 3D content, and if it's done right, it's amazing. If it's done wrong, at worst it hurts your eyes, and at best it's tolerable but adds nothing.
Yeah, I'd say that more often than not, when you're watching 3D content, it just doesn't seem like the real auteur of the document, of the film, like really put all that much thought into the 3D. And if you watch something where people were like clearly obsessed, or just very talented filmmakers, like for instance, Martin Scorsese's Hugo, like seems to me like Martin Scorsese and like one of the world's greatest cinematographers, Robert Richardson, thought what would like how to make this shot like have maximum impact in 3D in every single shot in the movie, and the proof is in the pudding. But like it's just dozens and dozens of mediocre movies where they're just like, well, throw $100,000 at like doing the post-op on it, and we'll make like an extra 5%.
That's half the reason why the format died. Yeah. 3D died because more than half of the 3D Blu-rays out there were crappy post-production. And the other half of it was because movie theaters were like, look, throw us a bone. Don't give everybody the same experience everywhere, because people with calibrated TVs. I stopped going to most movie theaters because if it literally was blurrier than the TV I have 10 feet in front of me, why am I going to the movies? So that was the other thing where people were like, hey, let a good theater be the only 4K 3D experience.
And also, just in practice, I think the darkness is a huge problem. I mean, I think people enjoyed the novelty of 3D at first, but like the images are darker and there's no way around it without going to the laser projectors. So. What's up?
Not when it's done right.
No, everything that runs off of a regular like arc light is going to be too dark in a 3D presentation. Absolutely. Like,
oh, you mean you're talking about theaters that don't have the right equipment?
Well, the right equipment is brand new. Yeah. The right equipment is in almost no. There's only like 2 screens in New York City, to my knowledge, that have the right.
I would go with the one Lincoln Center.
Lincoln Plaza has 2 screens. As their IMAX, and they have a regular movie theater that's running off of a laser light housing, which you can, generally speaking, how that's going to work if it rolls out, which it probably will. The main pitch on it is that the laser produces. So the way that you need to have a single point of light in a film projector or a video projector, otherwise it's going to create a double image as it passes through the lens. So you need to create a light that's bright enough to fill up that whole screen, but it has to be a single source. And the brightest source that they have available, like prior to this new technology, is to create an arc. So the way it works is inside the tube of the light bulb, there are these 2 contacts. You touch them together, and then you mechanically pull them apart, and there's a spark that goes between the 2 of them. And that's the light that lights the entire screen.
Huh.
There's only so far away that you can pull the 2 nodes apart from each other before the spark breaks.
Dissipates into the
So that the further away it goes, the brighter the image is, and you have a limit as to how far away you can go. Otherwise, you break it. Now, IMAX had a solution to get around that, but it was crazy complicated and expensive, and nobody used it to buy IMAX. But the way the laser housings work is you can pump up. You just make a more powerful laser, basically. And they just shoot that through, and you've got like a order of magnitude brighter image.
Huh.
And the pitch to these houses is 1, it can handle the 3D content better, and 2, like if you were to stand near a movie projector, like it's hot as hell. All that heat is wasted energy, and like movie theaters spend tens of thousands of dollars every year on electricity. And these laser housing it's the same thing as like having an LED. Like it's almost like it's a cold light basically. So it's supposed to like pay for itself over time. And we'll see how it ends up like rolling out in the theaters. But the bottom line is, if you're using passive glasses or active glasses too, you've basically got to get like a 400% brighter image to be able to produce like a 1-to-1 like comparison.
Interesting.
And it's just you can't do it. Like 3D movies in a regular movie theater, with the exception of like the bleeding edge, like premier IMAX screen in the United States.
I got one less than 10 blocks from my house.
Yeah, right. I had to travel for an hour and 10 minutes to get to it. Like with the exception of those like brand new screens, like everything's gonna be dark. And that's like something that like people like enthusiasts like you and me of 3D in general, is something that we just have to kind of like suck up, because again, there's value in seeing the creative, like the creative things that people do with it.
Oh yeah.
But and in the case of the last night, like absolutely the case. Like we had like in something that we could talk about, like the ways in which that 4K image was superior. But even if that image was superior, you're losing all of those decisions that the filmmakers are making to make that 3D image.
Yeah. That
said, since there's such a small minority of films that like leave and take advantage of that, you know, it's great that we're going to get to watch Casablanca in 4K. It's great that we're going to get to watch The Godfather in 4K, and all the thousand, if they even release them, to be honest with you. There's not, it hasn't really taken off as a format yet, but it's a more versatile format, and it's great to have like a very near to cinema experience using this technology. But in the case of this very specific narrow example, I think that the 3D was better.
Yeah. So that's the thing that really shocked me, and I've done some other tests afterwards. But if a movie is done properly in 3D, and there's a movie that I don't know why I really like it. I've seen it like 4 or 5 times. The Darkest Hour, aliens invade, and it's about these American guys in Russia while the aliens.
It's called The Darkest Hour.
Yeah, and that is real 3D, and while the 3D effect has to be why I like the movie so much, because it just was done in a really cool way. Not in a cheesy things are jumping out at you. Like, you get the depth of a lot of shots. There's a couple of edge of your seat moments, and I find myself looking down the street to see if the aliens are coming, which you don't really get unless you have that true 3D effect. But I would definitely say that if a movie is done correctly, I would prefer the experience in 3D over 4K. And I mean, that Transformers movie was a great example. The only one I wish they'd have a 4K master so we could do the test too. Is there a movie, your favorite director, Werner Herzog, The Cave of Forgotten Dreams?
I don't think that was. I think that was shot in 2K.
Yeah, it was only shot in 2K, but that was the movie that completely changed my perspective of 3D movies, because I believe it was actually shot in 3D, but most of it was like the 3D camera that you strap to a drone, like
a lot of it is post-op. Really?
Well, yeah,
but the best content is at the end of the film, and that's shot with a proper 3D camera.
So I've actually seen the movie 3 times now. We saw it once on the plasma. I saw it a second time by myself. The last time I just watched it, I watched the entire movie in 2D until the very end where they go back into the cave. And, spoilers, it's about, they found a cave in France which had...
The Chauvet Caves.
Which had paintings on it done by cavemen. And the way they drew the paintings, you could tell that with the fire in the middle of the cave and the flames, the reflection of the flames dancing on the wall, it looked like the paintings were dancing. It looked like people were running. And if I had just seen it in 2D, I would have loved it. But seeing it in 3D, so you could see how the caveman artist used the contour of the cave.
Yeah, it's painted on the cave, so you want to capture that depth of the cave shape.
There is no way anybody could ever grasp the awesomeness of that without seeing it in person or in 3D. So.
And it's completely unavailable to see in person, except for scientific research, because it's just too valuable.
Exactly. So a lot of people shit on 3D, and I've seen a lot of terrible 3D movies. I have almost all of them.
Yeah.
And but when done right, even though that really awesome 4K master of Transformers, I mean, there was so much detail in every scene, I absolutely preferred the 3D experience.
Before we end on the subject of the 4K, I don't know about you, but what really sold me on the concept, and it's also worth noting that we were watching it on a good screen.
Great screen. It's on a good player.
It has a good player, but we were watching it 4K content on a 4K TV. It has all the HDR features, and it's OLED, so the contrast is actually there. So if you were to watch, I could be wrong about this. We haven't done any tests to my knowledge. I certainly have. I don't think you have either. But I want to talk about HDR for a second. And my question is, if you don't have that extreme contrast that's available with the OLED, are some of these LCDs? Are these 4K LCDs running with the same contrast ratio as the 1080p ones? I mean, I don't really know, but I felt that when we were watching this content with the HDR on, the HDR made a bigger impact with me than the extra resolution did. I mean, because when we were comparing the Blu-ray, the 3D Blu-ray to the 4K, obviously, like, we were just focusing on the difference between 2D and 3D. But we also ran an experiment where we were watching the 3D Blu-ray in 2D mode, and then we compared it back there. And, like, it's clear as day that there's extra resolution to enjoy when you're watching it in 4K. But really, what sold me, which really gave me what I thought was like the true cinematic experience, was all that extra color depth. And it's a subtle effect. It's not the kind of it's not like going from DVD to Blu-ray or anything like that.
And it wasn't gimmicky either. There wasn't a bunch of really contrasty shots.
It's closer to getting the natural experience in the film. Like, you have to, like, you know, compress the color resolution of, you know, everything that we've ever watched at home has less color depth than what we would see in the movie theater. Certainly less than if you were to watch it on actual 35mm, but, like, even if you were watching like a 2K, something that's authored in 2K in the movie theater has more color depth than when you're watching it in 1080p on a DVD, on a Blu-ray at home.
Gotcha.
So, like, by recapturing that additional information, it's really getting back to producing that, like, larger-than-life kind of feel where you just have a bit more of, like, an accurate sense of what it feels like to be in that room or be in that space. I thought that if it was just 4K, I don't think anybody would give a shit, to be honest with you. But with that extra color depth, I thought that was the main wow factor for me in watching the 4K content. Because we were watching 1080p content, I mean, like, we could have continued watching that movie that way. It wasn't like a deal breaker.
Yeah.
But I think that it was that extra, just all that, it just felt like it almost gave like a 3D quality to the image, that it was so clear and, like, they're just such better contrast.
So that's a great question, and I guess the questions I have at the end of all of this. Now, my eyes process color very weirdly. I used to think I was completely colorblind, and then I took a million tests, and every result is different. So my eyes just process color weirdly, which I think is actually why, you know, it's like a subproduct of that is why I can see sharpness and detail differently.
100%, absolutely.
You know, like the person that's, you know, loses an arm, now the other arm gets super strong, like whatever it is. So I would have to have another opinion and to really comment on the HDR stuff, because I think I saw a color difference, but I more saw a detail difference.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought that everybody was... we saw it with his wife, too. I had assumed that everybody had the same experience as me, but you really were sold more on the detail.
But that is... I mean, I've explained things before to the guys in the Retro Roundtable. I've explained things where Steve will come back with a complete... the same findings, but his description is based on the color and color processing. Even though we saw the exact same inconsistencies. So I'm sure that's my issue in that. So my questions after all of this are, you know, how much does the HDR make a difference? And once again, if I had a correct capture equipment for this, we could do side-by-sides. What else about the 3D image made it stand out to me so much as opposed to 1080p 2D? Was it that are 3D Blu-rays essentially double the horizontal resolution? And because there's one for each eye, and is that extra detail packed in there? Is that what's adding it to make it seem so much better than the 2D?
Yeah, it is. Because, I mean, the concept in this, as far as I'm aware, and again, this is tying a little bit back to the film era, because there were 3D movies that were shot on film, like, not in the modern era, but, you know, Creature from the Black Lagoon and stuff like that. And the concept, as far as 3D was concerned, was that you were capturing the equivalent of, like, twice as much information. And if you were to imagine the film era, there was, there's grain, right? And your eyes are doing this gymnastics trick where it's evening, where it's averaging out that grain between those two eyes, and it was supposed to create something that, like, some people thought. Now, I had a projectionist friend who had a friend who shot home movies on 16mm 3D, and was a bit of a celebrity in the film projection community for this, and he would have his projectionist friends over. I never got to see it myself, but what these guys consistently said was that his 16mm projection equipment that he had specially calibrated for this 3D projection that he would do looked almost indiscernible from 35 millimeter, and that the proper 35 millimeter images like had the look of 70 millimeter because you were actually taking in more, more averages in resolution, provided it was perfectly in sync. And I think that the same logic probably applies to natively shot content. I'm not talking about the post-op, obviously, but
right.
There are two pieces of, there are two cameras that are shooting that thing. And
so that's the answer to the question then. As the question of why does a 1080p 3D Blu-ray look, when done right, look that much better than a 1080p 2D? And it's because there's double the horizontal image.
But it's not so much horizontal; it's vertical too. When you think about it, like it's just twice as much resolution.
Yeah. Okay.
The phenomenon actually also extends to frame rate, because you could extrapolate that it's sort of like watching something in 48 frames a second. You're basically getting twice as much information. So have you had any experience watching a high frame rate movie? Have you watched The Hobbit or?
I shockingly didn't like it because there was just one scene with Gandalf walking up a mountain, and I just remember looking...
Oh, we watched it together. We went to the IMAX.
Yeah, we went to the correct calibrated IMAX projector, one of the best ones around, and I just remember watching that scene and going, it's Ian McKellen with a fake beard walking up a hill. It's not Gandalf walking up a mountain, and I don't know if I don't know why. I don't know if it felt too real. I thought I'd love it. Everybody else complained.
It's super complicated trying to unpack it, but I think that the main reason why The Hobbit, and I agree with you, I didn't think The Hobbit was the right was the right place to experiment for this at all. What I think is that the whole concept of the Lord of the Rings in general is throwback and traditional and ancient. And I think that there is 12 hours of Lord of the Rings content that establishes what Middle Earth is supposed to be looking like. And I think when they just went and made this completely radical change to something that nobody had ever seen before for this 48 frame, what I always thought that if somebody wanted to, I was going to say The Matrix. If somebody shot The Matrix in 48 frames a second and it created a certain new hyper-real kind of look, an unnatural kind of a look, people would have been more receptive to it and seen oh, maybe this thing that I'm registering as different is actually good.
It's all a good point.
It absolutely just looks fucking wrong.
You see Ian McKellen
for the Lord of the Rings,
his amazing role as Gandalf, and now it's just Ian McKellen in a fake beard.
There's some people that think that is the case, and the real test for what I thought was one of the worst movies I saw last year was Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, which was shot in 4K and 3D and at 120 frames a second, and it has this very strange effect on you when you're watching it. And I can't say this in my own practice, but some of the film criticism that I read about it basically said that that if you were to watch it in 24 frames a second, which is how it's available on just regular consumer video, the acting is better. Because when you see it at 120 frames a second, you're more sensitive to the subtle mistakes of the acting. And they say that and when I watched the film, I thought that there was bad acting in it. And I read an article in Film Comment that basically said that yeah, so did I. And when I watched it on DVD later on for Academy consideration, the acting wasn't as bad. It still wasn't a good movie, but it wasn't. It plays weird tricks on your brain. I think the 3D does the same thing.
Yeah, the music industry went through that same thing. With once everything was 100% digital, people started to realize how much so many of these artists sucked really bad, because you could hear every.
Oh, really?
Nuance.
I never heard that. Yeah.
One of the things when we put out our album was the producer insisted on putting this digital fake tape noise, which to people.
The tape noise. Yeah, I've heard about that.
People with sensitive ears, like this crazy asshole, all I hear is hiss and pain. It just hurts my ears. And a lot of other people are like, oh, that's awesome. It sounds like a real album. And it was brutal arguing until we found somebody to remix the album to actually make it sound clear, but with a nice little, exactly the way you would a movie. And that, you could get a higher frame rate but still blend shit in. And it's the same way. He was able to mix it in a way where It didn't sound so sterile and digital. It still sounded like an album, but you don't hear any of the noise. That's an art form in itself for both movies and music. So
I mean, I've heard that, I'm not in the world at all, so I don't know for sure, but I heard that, like, you know, whereas, like, shooting 35mm in the movie industry is, like, has become very niche, I've heard that, like, recording analog tape is, like, fairly common practice still in the audio industry for that basic reason.
A common thing that people do nowadays, and there's so many insider secrets that you could, you know, watch on YouTube, but a common thing is you record everything into Pro Tools. And just because it's not cheating, it's just so much easier. I could roll out of bed at 7 o'clock in the morning, still kind of scratching the sleep out of my eye, plug in my guitar and play the most perfect guitar solo in the one take, not cutting, pasting, and just through a Focusrite box into my computer. And then take that later on and reamp it, not cutting performance, not changing anything. It's a true capture of the moment. But we decide, you know what, I don't like that amp. All right, give me 2 minutes. Plug it into another amp. Like, the performance is captured, and that is why it's such a big deal with music, and the money spent on it. So you take that, and then a very common thing to do is all digital, and then you go from a digital mix to an analog tape, and then analog mastering. And then, of course, there's still the people. If you have enough money to spend between $1,000 and $2,000 a day, you can go into one of those older studios and do everything in analog. But it is legit $1,000 a day.
Oh, it must be at least that. I mean,
yeah.
I know that Random Access Memories, the last Daft Punk album, was supposed to be 100% analog.
Really?
Yep. So what are you gonna do? I got a question just on that subject. Do you have any idea when the like digital revolution like hit the music industry? It must have been a little before. It, like in the film world, like is this like in like going back to the 90s, or like were they messing with it in the 80s?
So
do you have any idea?
I am not an expert at this. I would call myself sort of an expert on what people do today, but I think what happened was there was so much overlap in technology for such a long time that a lot of the digital stuff that was done still had to be put through analog whatever for a while.
Yeah.
And even like Mike Portnoy would always complain that Images and Words had triggered drums. I think I'm getting that right. I love Dream Theater. I didn't know triggered drums existed until the mid-2000s. And that's when like if you record each drum with its own microphone, if I hit a snare drum, and you want to replace that hit with the sound of another snare drum, you could do that. Today, it's super easy. You download a program for $60 and you could do that. But I would have never in a million years guessed that those were triggered drums until I read it in an interview. Like, it just because...
And this is from an album...
Images and Words by Dream Theater.
Which is
in
from
the 90s.
The mid-90s? Early 90s?
Early 90s, yeah.
Wow.
And it was... But everything else was analog. So the processing, it still went onto tape, it still got mastered. So I think there was such an overlap of technologies. It wasn't until probably 10 years ago or less that you would see that in the music world, where you'd start to hear overly sterile recordings, and you really would mostly hear them with indie recordings or demos, because all of the guys, women, all the humans that have been in the industry forever always knew the tricks, how to run them through. It's the old thing, like, oh, we got to mix it on this board sounds better. That's not bullshit.
Yeah,
if you have 4 analog mixing boards, they will sound slightly different. So,
well, I guess it's probably like what you're saying right there is probably key, which is that like it was a while before it became like a 100% digital pipeline, but there was probably like little digital doodads and stuff that came in like much earlier. Like,
exactly.
Am I mistaken that the Edge in U2, like his whole sound comes from like a digital delay pedal or something like that? Like,
so I'm not the biggest U2 fan.
Neither.
I do love the work that he did with the delay pedal, and I think it was this that wasn't Digitech. I think it was that blue delay pedal that's been around forever.
Yeah.
And I think he was just the master of bouncing notes off its own delay. But
is that an analog thing, or is that actually a digital thing?
It was an analog delay pedal.
It's an analog delay pedal. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, but it's still the overlap of technologies.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe I'm wrong, because you're the expert in this side the overlap of analog and digital, the first time I really started noticing it, we were kids, was the X-Files, where you'd see something shot on film, and then you'd see this ridiculously cheesy CGI effect, which at the time it was like, I remember being a kid and being like, oh, that's that new computer-generated graphics thing, and you just excused it because they're
very easy to see. It's the TV. Back in the day, there was an excuse for
even on the shitty TVs. I remember very clearly
you could always
seeing it. But back then there was nothing else to compare it to, whereas now it's like, oh, fucking come on, seriously?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that. But once again, I mean, you have something. If you see the X-Files remasters, which people have complained, I thought they did a ridiculously good job on that. You see something shot on film, and the Blu-ray master looks phenomenal.
What did they do with the CG assets? Did they redo them, or did they use the old file for that or something?
I think depending on the case, sometimes they redid them to try to look exactly like it. Sometimes they upscaled the effect. The only thing I do know is that all of the stock footage that was used between scenes, like, all right, let's there was no scene like this, but let's go to New York, and then there's just a stock pan of like the the Empire State Building or something. There wasn't literally that, but all of the stock footage was just upscaled. So you'll have these scenes where it's like Mulder and Scully, crystal clear, kind of still a cheesy looking special effect. Next scene, 5 or 6 seconds of like a garbage shot of something generic. Immediately following like a beautiful film shot.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because my experience with this is my wife is like the world's biggest Star Trek fan, and they did a terrific job. Well, something that I heard like ultimately lost money at the end of the day, but like for the fans, I think it's like the best thing that happened to the series was they did like a square one, like from original assets, like remake of every single episode of The Next Generation, and they're even very transparent about it. They'll like sometimes you'll queue up an episode and they'll give you a warning. It's like there's 3 seconds of standard definition footage in this episode, kind of a thing.
I love it,
and I love their attention to detail. Now, Next Generation is mostly done with like in-camera, optical effects and miniatures and all that kind of stuff, and multi-pass miniatures and all that kind of stuff. So you could, for instance, like if you look at the Enterprise and there's like the things that like make it go in the back of it are glowing red, like the jets on the back of it, like those are actually done on a separate pass. But you have a piece of film where it's like with the lights off, the thing goes by, and then another one with like a smoke filter in front of it with the lights on, and you composite them together and it looks like the lights are on, all that kind of stuff. That's a whole like analog trick. They're able to reconstruct that. But there are a couple of CG effects in it. Like there's an episode where they meet this crystalline entity. It's early in the series, I think. And that was what they had to redo, because the CG back in the day was done on a fucking like an Apple IIe or something like that, and you literally couldn't.
My grandparents' house in Bridgeport was one of the guys that worked on as like a contractor on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he would do cheesy shots like, "Hey, we need a shot of the galaxy with the Enterprise in the background. Here's $1,000. Go do that." Like he was one of those guys, but he showed me some of it.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
In any case, what they had to do in that, they couldn't restore those assets.
We had to
like it was gone, and I mean it looked cheesy as hell in the first place. But I think if they could have, they would have done it. But in those contexts, they had to like remake the crystalline entity, and that's a new special effect made to look old.
Made to look old, but new.
Yeah.
I watched like the first 10, the Next Generation of the first season, and I just thought they did a phenomenal job on the remake. Although I heard that the original Star Trek series, I heard that what they did to that looks like garbage.
Well, I think I could be wrong about this, but I think what they did in that one is they fucking George Lucas that shit, and they did new special effects. Now they're like updated modern model work. And it wasn't from like 2010 that they did it, but like they redid the special effects for like TV broadcasts in the 80s or something like that, and that's what they've been using on the remakes. But I've seen some of the funny thing is, original Star Trek and Next Generation, they're popular enough if they're important enough, just for like sci-fi history, that like they did these rescans, and they said that Next Generation wasn't profitable enough, and they basically said like you shouldn't hold your breath on ever seeing like Deep Space Nine or Voyager like in anything better than SD. And in some of those cases, like those things get into where there's a lot more CG, and again like that stuff is just lost forever. Like keeping like how like if you wanted to have them, you gotta be at your level obsessive to get a Super Nintendo from the 90s working. Like imagine like a fucking like Silicon Graphics like like video processing computer that probably has 10,000 hours. Like these things like are not just obsolete. Like it would take like a very specific kind of technician to even turn the fucking things on anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I had actually a conversation with Mike Matei about the Star Trek stuff, and he got as offended about the original Star Trek remakes as I do when I hear a band punch in live for a live recording. Like when they screw up live, so they re-record just one part of something. Like he was equally as offended at that as I was for that. So I kind of.
He's supposed to be a Star Trek fan, right?
Oh, big time, yeah. All right, so we got amazingly off topic 1,000 times. I'm gonna have to blame Modelo. This podcast is sponsored by Modelo Especial, and yeah, I don't know. Closing thoughts. If a movie is done properly, I would take 3D over 4K, 3D 1080p over 4K. If you have the opportunity to. A 480p CRT, whether it's crazy like a BVM or even just a really nice VGA monitor for any content.
Or maybe a consumer grade TV. Would you add that to that, like a 480p TV, like for what we're talking about now, like Knight Rider type stuff?
I would need to test more 480p consumer grade TVs.
Yeah, I agree.
But possibly for content that doesn't translate well to flat screens. I'd like to know more about all the things that we talked about, all the questions that we asked, and the only other thing that I could say for sure, which I've been hearing from Tobias for 4 years now, however long we've all been talking, the player is a big deal, and the better the TV, the more you'll notice the difference in the player.
Okay, we didn't even mention this, and I don't even know why, but we ran the movie for a little while off of the
Raspberry Pi.
And it just didn't look as good. And I couldn't put my finger on why.
If we had never looked
3D.
If we had never looked at the other solutions, I would have thought it was a perfectly good solution.
Yeah.
But compared to, it was the Xbox One S, compared to that playing 3D versus the 3D ISO, I absolutely noticed the quality difference.
I mean, even your wife did, who's not obsessive like we are. She's like, turn this one off. This isn't working. Like,
yeah. Absolutely. So make sure to choose the correct player, no matter what it is that you do. And those are my thoughts on that. And I would like to revisit all of these things. And I would like to do it again with the ability to capture 4K and 3D and to be able to do even just stills might even demonstrate a lot of what we talked about. I want to get DF Retro out to do movies with me. That guy's fucking amazing. John Linneman.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize the extent that he went into until I interviewed him. And that, we should get him. We should try to rope him. If you're watching, we're after you, John. That's it. You're next. You're coming out for movies with us. So, but yeah, anything else to add?
No, I don't think so.
All right, so you guys, I want to hear your thoughts on this. So, do you want to hear more things like this from us? Are you just sitting here the whole time pissed that we're not talking about retro gaming, Super Nintendo? Do you have any thoughts on some of the video stuff that we have, especially consumer grade high def CRT TVs? So many fucking acronyms in that. But do different consumer grade HD TVs process signal different? Is that one Sony, which I will put the model number in the description? Is that one different? So I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say on this one.
Yeah, me too.
And probably whether you like it or not, we'll do another release.
Yeah, we will talk about best 3D Blu-rays.
Oh, I would love to do one of those. If you guys want, post down below. We'll definitely do it. All right. Thank you, Scott, for taking the time to do it. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Bob.